PS1 might have been one of the pioneers of full 3D gaming, but it was the console's successor, the PS2, that really began to push ambitions and technology forward in a massive way. But there are some games that push the envelope more than Battlefield Earth pushed the camera to the side for no reason. Hello viewers, it's good to see you. I'm Will from Cultured Vultures. I was there when John Travolta became John Battlefield, and these are the PS2 games that pushed the console to its limits. The game where you can be an obese kung fu master horse gambling tycoon was slightly ambitious, if you can believe it. This open world masterpiece sat at the pinnacle of the PS2's library and even the GTA series as a whole for years, pushing the series and even an entire genre forward in a lot of ways. While the other GTA games on the PS2, and even before that on the PS1, offered excellent sandbox playgrounds that you could cause carnage in, GTA San Andreas gave players a world that they could feel a part of and interact with in ways that console gamers previously hadn't been able to, all wrapped up in a game that offered some of the best looking sunsets on the entire platform. And yes, you could still spawn a tank and cause mayhem. It was everything players loved and more. Controlling CJ, oh heck, presently we depart once more. You'll see the man travel through Los Santos, San Fierro and Las Venturas, meeting the unusual cast of absolute sociopaths that GTA tends to include. What separates San Andreas from the other GTA games is how much freedom it gave the player to take part in other activities beyond shooting everything that moves. Whether it be driving schools for flight, motocross racing, horse race betting, car modifications, nightclub dancing, hitting the gym, dating, gang warfare with territory control, not laughing at the doom named Jizzy B, or flying RC planes in one of the most annoying missions ever, San Andreas managed it all. The PS2 hadn't seen anything of this scope before, and few open world games have ever come close to matching the role-playing potential on offer here. We're burnt out from waiting for a new Burnout at this point, but at least we can still remember the good old days of listening to some pop rock bangers while slamming into oncoming traffic. I used to taunt a lollipop lady from across the road with my Burnout collection. Good times. Burnout 3 Takedown might be considered to be the best game in the series overall, and we'd even agree with that sentiment. But Burnout Revenge pushed the PS2 to its absolute limits at times, creating one of the best looking racing games on the platform. The fact that Burnout 3, with all its destruction and chaos, was able to run a smooth 60 frames per second anyway is a mind-blowing accomplishment. But Burnout Revenge upped the ante in a huge way, with improved graphics along with more cars and objects on screen at one time, while still maintaining a steady frame rate. Never mind technical mastery, that's straight up wizardry. The improved car models and lighting for the game made many tracks utterly incredible, even if some of the levels do look like they'd be given a bit of a yellow filter, while the destruction of cars was given some updates too. Perhaps what's most staggering about the work Criterion did is that Burnout Revenge also introduced a traffic checking feature, which basically let you ping pong cars going in the same direction as you. Cars would often be flying around everywhere, both rival races and otherwise, and yet Burnout Revenge still managed to maintain that smooth as butter frame rate. Honestly, it's brilliant what Criterion accomplished here, and while the PS2 exclusive follow-up Dominator polished the graphics even further, some of the chaos that pushed the PS2 to its breaking point was lost, just like this IP in general. God damn it. Hey, do you remember when licensed games sucked, etc, etc? You know the drill. However, it was always surprising when a licensed game managed to be somewhat decent at least. So imagine everyone's surprise when Peter Jackson's King Kong, the game tie-in to the pretty good film remake in 2005, turned out to be pretty good itself. While you might think that is because of King Kong himself, who does appear in a couple of levels to beat up some massive dinosaurs before going on that ill-fated rampage across New York City at the Tales finale, the actual highlight and moments that push the PS2 to its limits are the rest of the game. When not pulverizing dinosaurs and swinging through the jungle as King Kong, you're instead playing as playwright Jack Driscoll, played by Adrian Brody. Dragged along on this cursed voyage, you reach Skull Island and find it filled with nasty little critters that want to turn you into lunch. Playing out like a first-person shooter, the Jack levels are like Jurassic Park with a Tommy gun, with players at times being able to take advantage of the island's food chain to sneak past difficult enemies. The graphics are incredible too, with gorgeous landscapes and stellar work capturing the likenesses of the film actors. If you ever have wanted to be shouted at by a digital Jack Black playing the world's most obnoxious film director, King Kong has got you covered. Question time, GAM fans! What was the movie that Peter Jackson made before Fellowship? Drop the answer down in the comments below and you could win a free Steam key. For free. Hideo Kojima and the teams that work on his games have earned a reputation over the years for making titles that push the boundaries and limits of gaming consoles. Metal Gear Solid was nothing short of a landmark achievement for the PS1, so naturally Kojima and the gang had to up their game when it came to the PS2. Metal Gear Solid 2 was a leaps and bounds technical improvement to the point where it was embarrassing most other PS2 releases at the time, even if most people were salty about the ride and bait and switch. But Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater went much further. From graphics to gameplay, frame rate, textures, and the minute little details that you only seem to get from Kojima produced games, Metal Gear Solid 3 was a marvelous accomplishment for both PS2 and the Metal Gear Solid franchise. Like Metal Gear Solid 2 with substance though, Konami released an updated version of Metal Gear Solid 3, Subsistence, which included online play for those of us who got more than 1 hour of internet time a week, and a redesigned third-person camera to move away from the more fixed camera angles that the Metal Gear Solid series had become known for. You'd think that giving players more control over what they could see would reveal some blemishes or aspects that players might not have been able to find with the original camera angle. But somehow Metal Gear Solid 3 managed to look even better from this new perspective. It just goes to show that if you load your games up with so many handcrafted little details, features, quirks, and the ability to let Father Time work his magic.
Drop your weapon.
You'll be able to stand up to incredible amounts of scrutiny. We're back on the Criterion hype train once again, as the Burnout crew decided to ditch the burning rubber for lead with Black. A modern military shooter that released before Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare made the concept cool, see insanely profitable. Black arguably provided the blueprint that allowed the Modern Warfare era of Call of Duty and beyond to become the juggernaut it is today. Stick a heavily armed dude behind enemy lines in Black Woods Eastern Europe, make sure there's an explosion going off at least every 5 seconds, and you've got the makings of a winning formula. From a gameplay perspective, the guns feel incredibly powerful, with Black boasting some of the best feeling shotguns in all of gaming. But the real limit testing comes from the game's graphics. From character models to the guns themselves, everything in Black looks like it's about one step away from forcing the PS2 to spontaneously combust from overexertion. The guns are probably the most detailed models ever committed to the PS2, while the character models themselves look incredible, and their death animations wouldn't look out of place in the following gen either. The real highlight of the whole package are the explosion effects, which turn what is already a masterclass in presentation into a blockbuster experience and a standout shooter on the PS2. If you want to experience the best looking first person game you could play on the PS2, Black is the pinnacle, and the next game is probably the pinnacle of racing games. See? The first two Gran Turismo games arguably produced the best graphics on the console, something that Polyphony Digital would continue to push with future installments on follow-up consoles. Gran Turismo 3 was an excellent showcase of what the PS2 could be capable of, but Gran Turismo 4 pushed the limits of the console even further. Whether it was the detailed models of hundreds of licensed cars, or the depictions of real-life racetracks like the Nuremberg Ring or Laguna Seca, Gran Turismo 4 managed to become one of the best-looking games on the entire console. Not only did it test the graphical capabilities of the PS2, but Gran Turismo 4 even made use of some rarely used features on the PS2, as the game even supported a rudimentary form of HD gaming along with 3 other games across the entirety of the PS2's library. Polyphony Digital have a knack for eking out the absolute maximum that the current PlayStation is capable of. Regardless of what you might think about how grindy the most recent Gran Turismo is, it's a showcase piece of the absolute raw power of the PS5, and that's a tradition that has been maintained throughout the life of both PlayStation and Gran Turismo. If we do a PS3 version of this list, expect more Gran Turismo. That's just how it goes. The fact that Capcom managed to get Resident Evil 4 working on a GameCube in the first place is still wild, but the PS2 version in particular takes the cake. The Resident Evil series has always pushed graphics to the edge, with the pre-rendered backgrounds of the original Resident Evil trilogy being some of the best and most innovative ways of implementing 3D environments in a way that looked good. But Resident Evil 4's character models, environments and more were a huge improvement of not only the previous Resident Evil games, but on other Capcom games at the time. From the village to the castle to the dingy little island and its laboratory, every single part of Resident Evil 4 set a new benchmark for survival horror gaming. Going back to the PS2 version of RE4 in particular, it's a bit of a step down from the GameCube version, which mostly offered better particles and lighting along with cutscenes rendered in the game engine. The PS2 version wasn't quite as powerful as the GameCube, so Capcom had to make some concessions in those regards to make the port actually work, which unfortunately meant your weird chosen outfits wouldn't appear in cutscenes as they were all pre-rendered FMVs. However, Capcom still managed to keep the game running at a consistent frame rate despite the downgrade in hardware, while offering new modes and goodies as a way of making up for the loss. There's a reason it's been considered a miracle port in the years since. The Battlefield series had already been a huge hit on PC by the time Battlefield 2 Modern Combat came to the PS2, pushing the very limits of players' GPUs by offering dozens of players online at once. Console gaming had exploded in popularity as well though, so EA and DICE decided it would be best to try and make a console-specific Battlefield game, the result being Battlefield 2 Modern Combat. The game pushed the PS2's online capabilities to new heights, offering online matches with up to 24 players alongside huge maps and decent graphics. It might not be the best looking game on this list, but it was a darn sight better than some of the other shooters that were available on the PS2. What makes Battlefield 2 Modern Combat such a boundary pushing game though was the single player campaign, specifically the hot swapping feature. While the story and missions were just a simple collection of challenges and objectives, players were able to use a feature called hot swapping to actively change to another allied soldier in the level. You could start out the mission as a regular infantry soldier on the front line, only to hot swap to a sniper to get a better look at the wider battlefield, and then hot swap to an engineer to take out the enemy's vehicles and artillery. It's a feature that we're shocked hasn't been adapted into another shooter these days, but it all managed to work seamlessly on the PS2. We don't know how, but they managed it. The first God of War game was a true test of what the PS2 could handle, with its more cinematic take on the character action genre of games, taking what worked about the Devil May Cry series and upping the stakes by adding massive bosses like the Hydra and others. Oh, and the extreme level of violence too, and a few boobies. Having that much blood and nipple strewn around the place probably placed a massive load on the PS2's CPU as well. Somehow though, the developers managed to knock it out of the park with the sequel, God of War 2. When the game opens up with Kratos fighting a 200-foot tall Colossus of Rhodes, and the console somehow doesn't manage to instantly explode at the sheer spectacle of what's happening, you know God of War 2 is a technical marvel. Released when the PlayStation 3 was already out, God of War 2 itself follows the same formula as the previous game, containing a good mix of combat, platforming and puzzle solving, occasionally interspersed with some of the best boss fights on the platform. It's just that God of War 2 pushes pretty much everything up to 11, making it a truly fitting swan song for the PS2. Much like the Gran Turismo games, the God of War series has been a benchmark setting game for what the PlayStation can be capable of, with the inevitable God of War title probably being the one decent selling point to actually own a PS5 Pro. Each of Kratos' beard hairs are going to be individually rendered. Maybe. We can't confirm that. Our sources would kill us. We'd kill for another game in the next series though. Dark Cloud has gathered a reputation in the years since the PS2 of being one of the best RPGs on the console, but the sequel, Dark Chronicle, has been somewhat forgotten over the years, which is a shame considering Dark Chronicle pushes the capabilities of the PS2 even further than the original game. Like Dark Cloud, players work their way through a series of procedurally generated dungeons, fighting enemies with incredibly fun action RPG gameplay, with the two playable characters of Max and Monica offering different combat style and powers. While the gameplay and the graphics both look fantastic, especially considering Dark Chronicle is one of the earlier released games on this list. It's the action outside the dungeons that pushes the PS2. Basically, as you explore dungeons, you unlock gemstones which can be cashed in to unlock plans for new buildings and items that can be placed in a village of your own creation. Once you've placed the buildings, you can start recruiting villagers to populate the town, completing requests for them and fulfilling certain conditions to advance through the game. As RPGs go, Dark Chronicle was incredibly involved and filled with intricate systems that come together to create magic. Throw in some of Level 5's classic cel-shaded graphics, making for some of the best anime style visuals on the platform, you've got a limit pushing RPG that everyone should check out. And that is our list of some of the games that pushed the PS2 to its limits. But what do you think pushed the PS2 to its limits? Personally, I have to say that Shadow of the Colossus was a major impact on me, and seeing those giant colossus just moving around freely in the environment was mind-blowing. But tell us what you think. Let us know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you soon.